Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is the Trite Maniac, or Dr. Nighttime if you want to refer to me by my in-game name. And tonight, I'd like to walk you through a video on 5 mistakes that a lot of new players make when first playing Crystal Stone Arena. So, when I say new players, I'm usually referring to people who have been playing for about a week. So by that point, you've probably figured out 2 things. One, that if you want to measure up, okay, how strong is the opponent's play likely to be? A very simple approximation is the vanilla 3-drop test. Right? If your play would be bad against a 3-drop with no text, 3-attack card with no text, then it's a bad card, or at least it's a bad play for that situation. If it would be good against that, then it's a good play for that situation. The other thing you probably have realized is the simple calculation to figure out who's winning. That you can add up your remaining life points plus your number of crystals and compare that to your opponent's remaining life points and opponent's number of crystals, and that just gets an approximation of who's winning in the game. I assume that you've already figured that out and are thinking along those lines. If you start thinking along those lines, there are a couple of mistakes that a lot of new players make. And one of them is focusing too much on high attack power cards. So just looking through some of this. Some good examples are Hilda here. Worst case, just an empty 2-drop. Right? Okay, so if you go up against an empty 3-drop, take a point of damage and gain a crystal because you took a point of damage. Seems okay even when you don't get off her ability. And when you do, you're now swinging for 6. And you think, well, 6, right? I've got an okay play already. I'm burning 2 crystals to gain +4 power. That looks like a net plus, right? If we said that 1 damage is worth 1 crystal. But you have to realize that +1 power does not always turn into +1 damage. Look at what happens if you pay those 2 crystals. Hilda becomes a 6. If you go up against an opponent who's a 3-drop, so now you deal 3 points of damage, opponent gets a crystal because you won combat, and so now you dealt 3 damage, but you lost 2 crystals and opponent gained a crystal. And so now this suddenly overpowered card, or this thing you think, oh wow, I can't believe this is a common card, right? It seems so overpowered for a common card. Even when you get off the ability, it's kind of neutral. And then you factor in the erase factor, and yeah, okay, now it's actually looking like a reasonable good card. Right? Danelle also. Right? So Hilda and Danelle, if you started with blue, which I did, right, Hilda and Danelle you immediately think of as a pair, and very similar to each other, and they both run into the same problem of just being high power does not mean dealing a lot of damage. Other examples of this. In green, you've got Grand Windsor. Here, you think burn 1 crystal, gain 2 power. But no, if you go up against a vanilla 3-drop, you lose 1 crystal, opponent gains a crystal because of combat, and you deal 2 damage. Pretty neutral. So, again, neutral is not bad, but you might feel like it's an auto-include. No, not really. Another issue that comes up a lot is overvaluing crystal destruction. Right? We said 1 crystal is worth 1 point. So if you can destroy crystals, that should be the same as dealing a damage or healing a damage. Right? Well, not exactly. Take a look at Damus. Yes, in the absolute best case scenario, you burn 1 of your own crystals and burn 2 opponents' crystals. But think about this for a moment. Given the rules of the game, and if you've been playing for only a week or so, you might not be aware of the rules of the game. You might still be figuring out some of the finer rules. Crystal destruction happens after costs are paid but before combat. This means if you start your turn with one crystal, use it for an ability, and then gain a crystal because you lost or drew combat, that crystal destruction would not actually happen. Because the order is, you start the turn with a crystal, you burn it for your ability. Then the crystal destruction would try to happen, but you no longer have a crystal to destroy. Then, after combat, you gain your crystal back from losing or drawing combat. So, there's never a time when you can almost never a time when you can guarantee destroying 2 crystals. Yes, if you're in a situation where the opponent's text has been erased, in that case, yes, but that's a niche situation and requires seeing 2 specific cards one after the other. So, stuff like Damus is somewhat overrated. Also, hand in hand with Damus, but even worse, Romter. You destroy the 2 crystals, if they're there, but now you're lower power, and you're paying a more consistent cost, right? With Damus, if neither of you has any crystals, or at least if you don't have any crystals, we said a vanilla 3-drop isn't that bad. I mean, it's not good, but you say, well, how bad could Damus be? Well, with Romter, you're playing a worse than vanilla 2-drop in that situation. If your opponent doesn't have any crystals, you play a worse than vanilla 2-drop. It damages you for 1. So, yeah, don't play Romter. Yeah. On the topic of this crystal destruction, another mistake that a lot of players will make, this card isn't necessarily a bad card, but look at something like Vedan. Again, burns 3 crystals, goes up to 7 power. That looks really, really good, right? 7's a big number. But if you think about it, that's only burn 1 more crystal and gain 1 more power than what Hilda and Danelle gave you. And they're pretty neutral. Now, the ability to destroy 2 crystals, right, this is where it ties into crystal destruction. So destroying 2 crystals is approximately as good, by my data is a little bit worse than, but approximately as good as dealing 1 damage or healing 1 damage. So, not bad, right? Burn 3 multicolored crystals, get 4 points worth of effect. But not exactly knocking the walls down with that. Also, if I turn this 3 power off, switch blue card, I'm looking for a cobuzin. Did I miss it? Okay, I'm fumbling around here. It's right there under my nose. Cobuzin. There we go. Again. It's like, think of it like the upgraded, like the +1 version of Hilda or Danelle. Right? Instead of burn 2 crystals, be at 6 power, it's burn 3 crystals, be at 7 power. And they have to be multicolored crystals. And so Vedan at least is a 3-drop by himself. Cobuzin is only a 2-drop. And the restriction, only drawing 1 card next turn, it's worth a little, but it's not worth a lot. So, again, this is why, on paper, while it looks like blue-green is the best multicolored deck, right, you say, well, look at this. You've got, in Mista, you've got the most consistent multicolor generator. You play Mista, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a blue and a green. And you have a large number of multicolored crystal users. You've got Vedan, Cobuzin, Lindeen. On the blue side, Helen, Tigra. Right? All those options, but they're not, I mean, more decent options. I mean, yeah, that's an improvement, but they're not exactly knock the walls down options. And, you know, a lot of what these cards do just aren't as strong as they initially look. Finally, the other issue with crystal destruction, if we're going to talk about the red-blue deck. There, you've got Nat Fire. Right? Deal 3, destroy a crystal. Okay. Almost like a Maxisser, but not quite. And then you've got Tanda just... Where is she? There she is. Burn 4 crystals. Deal 4 damage. Okay, that by itself is alright. And then destroy 2 enemy crystals, which is exactly worth a little less than a point. So, kind of underwhelming. And apparently my cat wants to say hi. Not sure if you can hear her. Yeah. And then, yeah, for Cynthia also. Let's bring Cynthia up. Cynthia, you look, just has this really big bopper effect, right? Sure, at quite a cost, but dealing 6 damage all at once seems really powerful. But 6 damage for 5 crystals, it's not bad, but it's not the overpowering juggernaut that a lot of players think she is. And this leads into the next mistake, mistake number 3. So mistake number 1 was overvaluing high power. Mistake number 2 is overvaluing crystal destruction. Mistake number 3 is overvaluing this trio of cards, Cynthia for red-blue, Woodrunodon for red-green, and of course, Tigra for blue-green. They all have similar effects. Burn 5 crystals, get optimally +7 in your score. And they're 4 drops, which is better than, 2 or 3 drops. But again, if you think about what that does against a vanilla 3 drop, a 2, a 3, or a 4 are all equal on combat. A 3, goes toe-to-toe, you draw. A 2, you take a damage but gain a crystal. A 4, you deal damage but opponent gets a crystal. But yeah, there are some, if your opponent doesn't play exactly a 3, yeah, there's going to be some advantages or disadvantages to playing either a 2, a 3, or a 4. 4 would never be a disadvantage. But there are a couple reasons why those cards just aren't quite as good. First of all, the difference between requiring 4 crystals and 5 crystals is a lot bigger than you would think. People tend to fall for the all numbers are ratios fallacy. We tend to think of 2 as being twice as much as 1, but 5 is only 1 1/4 times as much as 4. But in this case, the difference between 4 crystals and 5 crystals is actually pretty significant, because a lot of your crystal generators generate a crystal by themselves and are low power, so they're likely to gain a crystal through combat. So, if you need 4 crystals in 2 different colors, generate for one color, generate for the other color, and you're ready to go. You would need to spend an additional turn, again, besides like Olivia, you'd often need to spend an additional turn generating that 5th crystal. Which means to charge up and then discharge, that's not +2 over 3 turns, 2 turns of charging, and then the discharge. That's +2 over 4 turns, because it takes an additional turn to charge, and so it's not quite as good. And I was making this mistake when I played my first multicolor deck. It was red-green. I ran Woodrunodon. When I cut Woodrunodon, my win rate went up. Because I realized I was never actually activating Woodrunodon's ability. And better to have an additional card that could actually do something. I forgot what I replaced it with, but I made a replacement and my win rate went up. Another perspective on why these 4-drop cards aren't quite as good. If you think of your plus-minus, or how much you're plussing off of your crystals, so If you're gaining, so consider a card like Maxisser, right? Gets you 4 on-field life differential for a cost of 2 crystals. That's 2 for 1. That's 2 to 1. Whereas for a card like Vedan, that's 7 for 5. That's weaker usage per crystal than something like Maxisser. Or, from another perspective, if you have, let's say you have 3 green crystals and 2 red crystals. If you play a Panatasis, and Panatasis does not win the combat, right? If it's a draw or a combat loss, you now could have a green and a red and can Maxisser again after that. Vedan can't let you do that, right? Because you're using all 5 of them. So that's another example of demonstrating why burning a bunch of crystals at a plus in batches can be better. Now, there's also the matter of, how many points you're gaining per time or per turn. In that case, yeah, they're all even. But when you think about your crystal use economy, the bigger and also more expensive cards, right? They're all legendaries. They have more conviction. You can see, I haven't even leveled up my Tigra very much, because why would I? But those bigger cards are less efficient at using their crystals. Okay, I think I've said enough about that. A couple of other cards that a lot of people tend to run and really shouldn't. They're pretty similar. Marie and Cali. They're even right next to each other. Now, why do I think these cards are terrible? Well, because they don't really do anything good. Cali feels neutral, right? You destroy 2 of your crystals, you destroy 2 of the opponent's crystals, and otherwise, no damage can happen. Well, except if after destroying the opponent's 2 crystals, the opponent can get off any sort of good ability, that ability can still happen. And as long as that ability isn't combat damage or raising power to do combat damage, so what? And with Marie, sure, erasing is good. Erasing is not worth a point. So you're spending 2 points for 2 erasures. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think these cards should be buffed, because I don't think these cards should be good. These cards tell your opponent you don't get to play the game for a turn or 2. Right? Whatever you're trying to do, it's just not happening. And you don't want that you don't want that happening very often in a game. You don't want that to become meta. You don't want turn after turn after turn of that. The point of playing a game isn't just to make sure it's fair and balanced. A coin flip game is balanced. You want the decisions you make over the course of the game to actually make the game interesting. And with these cards, it essentially neutralizes any sort of decision that the opponent is making. And yeah, these no fun cards that just, nope, one player's not making any choices. Yeah, you don't want a whole lot of that. But yeah, Cali and Marie. So unlike other card games where if you have a card that's only situationally good, you can just hold on to it. Since you're shuffling your hand back into your deck every single turn, you can't save a Marie for exactly the moment she's needed, or save a Cali for exactly the moment she's needed. So that's why these are kind of noob trap cards. They look decent, they look like good counterplay. No, they're not good counterplay. And finally, another pair of similar cards. Another pair of similar cards that a lot of players will run, and I really don't think they should. Or at least they look good. They look like you can absolutely cheese wins out of them, but then you try using them, and they're really not as good as advertised. Pan Chang and T-Grounder. Again, 2 cards right next to each other. And they have issues for similar reasons. Well, so you feel like both of them are ways to just win games that you were supposed to lose, right? With T-Grounder, it's like, yeah, I took a bunch of damage, but so do you. And with Pan Chang, it's, Ah, yes, you wanted to deal a whole bunch of damage to me? Nope, now I deal a whole bunch of damage to you. But here's what I don't like about these cards. So let me start with T-Ground. Yes, in particular situations, right, if you're at 1 health, and the opponent is at 2 or 3 health, actually 3 is tough to win off of, right, because your opponent would need to play something at least 4 power, but if you're at 1 health and your opponent's at 2 health, and your opponent plays something stronger than a 2, right, which opponent probably will try to finish you off, then yes, you've turned your loss into a draw. But that meant you went into that turn losing by 1 point. And T-Grounder is not good at any other point in the game, right? You just, okay, you take a bunch of damage, but it doesn't really plus for you. Again, unless your opponent is playing something that gains a whole lot of power, but as we described, that's not really in the meta and really shouldn't be either. So if it's, yeah, okay, you just burned a whole bunch of crystals to deal a whole bunch of extra damage that now gets turned back against you. Situationally, I guess that would work, but it's really hard. Only a few decks would even do that. And otherwise, it's just a dead card. Typically, if you have a card that you almost never want to play, you'll see it about 3/7 of the time. If you're seeing that card, if you're having that dead draw 43% of the time, what that means is that's going to cost you at least a point over the course of the game, and that game that you were losing and you needed to pull a miracle out in order to manage a draw, you wouldn't have been losing that game in the first place. Right? Remember, we said T-Grounder only really works when you're in that down by 1 situation. And then there's Panchang. Panchang, if you're like, okay, yeah, I'm not taking damage, right? It's not like T-Grounder where I'm turning losses into draws, I'm turning losses into wins, right? Well, here's another issue with Panchang. Let's do the simple math again on position being ahead or behind. If your opponent plays a 3-drop, just an empty 3-drop, you burn a crystal, so you're -1 thus far. Then you deal 2 damage to the opponent, and then opponent gains a crystal from combat. You're net 0. You would specifically need to play it into something where you think the opponent's going to try to deal a whole lot of damage. And since a lot of decks don't really do that, you've again got a card that just doesn't do a whole lot. And if you play it at the wrong time, you can burn a crystal and then not deal extra damage. And then you're -1 off your own ability. And you might also think, well, okay, maybe I'll just save it for when I'm on really low health, right? Well, as you'll learn, it's a little uncommon to try to finish off a low health opponent based on high power. You more often finish off a low health opponent with an ability. It's something that says deal 2 damage, deal 3 damage. You know, something like a Maxis or a Panatasis, a Natfire, Parloader, Lyzetta, those sorts of things. Dealing some burst damage, that's just because if you're in that situation, right, think on the other side, if you're playing against an opponent who's on low health, and you try to win off of raw power, well, you don't exactly know what the opponent's power numbers are going to be. You have some indications, but a lot of cards will change their power numbers, or even without crystals, some of them can just gain +1 power off their abilities. So it's a little tough to say what the opponent's power is going to be. But if the opponent is at 3 health, and you have a card that deals 3 damage before combat, you know that if the opponent isn't healing, you win. So, for those reasons, often when you're in that situation, and you're trying to stave off defeat, that final blow isn't even going to come from power. It's going to come from an ability. And so, for that reason, I'd say, yeah, Panchang and T-Grounder, don't run them. Yeah. And so that sums it up. That sums up my 5 mistakes that new players make at Crystal Soul Arena. Overvaluing high power, overvaluing crystal destruction, overvaluing the 3 big boppers from each union, playing Cali and Marie thinking that they can save them for situational defensive plays. Doesn't really work that way. And trying to cheese out late game wins with T-Grounder and Panchang. Yes, when you're not expecting it and someone plays it against you, you feel like it's cheating and you want to try it, and then you try it and it doesn't really work. But in general, they're not such great cards. So, I hope you found this informative, and I'll see you next time. Take care.